2 years of marriage to Choi Jin-ho, and Kira Washington still felt her breath catch when she heard his footsteps in the marble hallway. Not from love anymore, but from the cold certainty that another line had been crossed, another boundary dissolved in the name of protecting what was his. Tonight, she was packing her bags while the King of Seoul's underworld sat in his office, calmly ordering executions as if discussing the weather. The Louis Vuitton suitcase lay open on their California king bed, the same bed where Jin-ho had whispered promises about leaving the life behind, about building something clean together. Kira folded each silk blouse with mechanical precision, her hands steady despite the chaos in her chest. At 28, she had learned to compartmentalize fear, anger, and heartbreak into neat sections of her mind, the way Jin-ho compartmentalized his empire into territories and profit margins. She could hear him through the mahogany door, his voice carrying the particular tone he used when lives hung in the balance. Korean phrases mixed with English commands, each word delivered with the authority of a man who had never been refused. Park Sung-min had betrayed the Choi family operations, sold information to the rival Kim syndicate, and Jin-ho was deciding whether death would come quickly or slowly. The conversation felt routine, businesslike, as if discussing which restaurant to choose for dinner. Kira's wedding ring caught the bedroom light, a flawless 3-carat diamond that had once symbolized promise but now felt like a beautiful shackle. She remembered their wedding day 18 months ago, how Jin-ho had looked at her like she was salvation itself, how he had promised her that love would transform him into something better than the monster Seoul feared. Standing in the Cathedral of Light, surrounded by flowers that cost more than most people's annual salary, she had believed him. The office door opened and Jin-ho emerged, his movements fluid and controlled as always. At 35, Choi Jin-ho possessed the kind of dangerous elegance that made boardrooms and back alleys equally treacherous. His black hair was perfectly styled despite the late hour, his custom Armani shirt still crisp, his dark eyes holding the satisfaction of a predator who had just secured his territory. He noticed the suitcase immediately, his expression shifting from post-business calm to something colder. "What are you doing?" he asked, his English accent free despite Korean being his first language. Kira continued folding her clothes, not trusting herself to look at him directly. "What does it look like I'm doing, Jin-ho? You're upset about Park Sung-min." His tone suggested this was merely another negotiation, another problem to be managed with the right combination of logic and pressure. "The man tried to destroy everything I built. Everything we built together. We didn't build anything together." Kira finally turned to face him, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest. "You built an empire on blood and fear, and I've been pretending it was something else for 2 years. Tonight you had a man tortured to death in the basement while I was upstairs cooking dinner. That's not a marriage. That's me being an accessory to murder." Jin-ho's jaw tightened, the only outward sign of emotion he allowed himself. Sung-min chose his fate when he betrayed family trust. "I protected what belongs to us." "What belongs to us?" Kira repeated, her laugh bitter and sharp. "You mean what belongs to you?" "I've never belonged to us, Jin-ho. I belong to you, like another asset to be protected and managed and displayed when convenient. You knew what I was when you married me." The words came out measured and cold, the voice he used in syndicate meetings when subordinates questioned his authority. "You accepted the ring, accepted the life, accepted the protection I provide. You don't get to pretend moral superiority now. I accepted a lie you told me about changing." Kira zipped the suitcase closed with more force than necessary. "I believed you when you said love would make you different. But you're exactly the same man who put a bullet in Kim Tae-sung's head 6 months into our engagement. The only thing that changed was how well I learned to ignore the screaming from downstairs." Jin-ho stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them with dangerous intensity. "Where exactly do you think you'll go, Kira? You think the Kim family forgot you're my wife? You think the Russians don't know your face? You think any place in Seoul exists where my enemies won't find you the moment you walk out that door? I'll figure it out." The response came out stronger than she felt, but Kira held his stare without flinching. "Maybe I'll go back to Chicago where people don't get murdered for business disagreements. Maybe I'll remember what it feels like to sleep without wondering if tonight's the night someone decides to send you a message by putting a knife in my chest." Something flickered behind Jin-ho's controlled expression, a crack in the armor he wore even at home. "You'll come back," he said finally. "You always come back when you realize the world isn't as safe as you think it is." Not this time. Kira lifted the suitcase off the bed, its weight substantial but manageable. "This time I'm done pretending that loving a monster makes me anything other than another monster." She walked toward the door, each step echoing on the imported marble floors. Jinho didn't move to stop her, didn't raise his voice, didn't plead. That was his mistake. Behind her, she heard him return to his office, already dismissing her departure as temporary theatrics. The sound of his chair creaking as he sat back down felt like a door slamming shut on 2 years of her life. Kira paused at the penthouse elevator, looking back one last time at the home that had never truly felt like home. The walls held original Monet paintings and family photos, expensive art mixed with memories, beautiful lies wrapped in Italian leather and Korean tradition. Through the office window, she could see Jinho silhouetted against the Seoul skyline, already back to work, already moving on to the next crisis that required his particular brand of violent problem-solving. The elevator doors closed between them, and for the first time in months, Kira Washington breathed freely. Kira's sister Maya opened the apartment door at 3:17 a.m. wearing a Northwestern University Medical School sweatshirt and the expression of someone who had been expecting this moment for months. At 26, Maya Washington possessed the practical wisdom of a woman who had watched her older sister disappear into a world of expensive lies and willful ignorance. She stepped aside without questions, allowing Kira to drag her Louis Vuitton suitcase into the cramped studio apartment that smelled like instant ramen and medical textbooks. "You finally left him," Maya said, starting coffee with the mechanical efficiency of someone who survived on caffeine and determination. "It wasn't a question. He had a man tortured to death while I was upstairs cooking dinner." Kira collapsed onto Maya's secondhand couch, exhaustion hitting her like a physical blow now that adrenaline was fading. "I heard the screaming, Maya. I heard Choi Jinho giving orders about where to dump the body, and I just kept stirring the soup like it was normal." Maya handed her sister a chipped mug filled with coffee that tasted like salvation. "How long have you known what he really does for a living?" "I've always known he was dangerous." Kira wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, grateful for something simple and honest after 2 years of crystal glasses and imported porcelain. "But I told myself it was abstract danger, like knowing someone works in a risky industry. I never let myself understand that he personally kills people who inconvenience him." Through the apartment's single window, Chicago's pre-dawn skyline provided stark contrast to Seoul's neon-soaked towers. Kira realized she had forgotten what normal looked like. People who worked regular jobs, paid bills with legal money, and solved problems without violence. Maya's apartment represented everything she had abandoned when she accepted Jinho's proposal. Independence earned through struggle, security built on personal capability, love that didn't require overlooking murder. Meanwhile, 8,000 miles away, Choi Jinho sat in his penthouse office staring at a wedding photograph that had once symbolized redemption but now felt like evidence of his capacity for self-deception. The emergency meeting with Park Young-soo, his most trusted lieutenant, had been interrupted 3 times by thoughts of Kira's empty closet and the silence that had replaced her laughter echoing through marble halls. "She'll come back," Park Young-soo said, reviewing intelligence reports about Kim Jae-wook's escalating threats against Choi family operations. "Women like comfort and security more than moral principles. Give her a week to remember what life looks like without unlimited credit cards and personal protection." Jinho's response was interrupted by his phone buzzing with a message from Maya Washington. "She's safe. Don't contact her." The brevity felt like a slap across the face, reminder that Kira's sister had never trusted him, had always seen through the expensive suits and romantic gestures to recognize the killer underneath. "Kim Jae-wook is mobilizing everything he can buy or threaten," Park Young-soo continued, spreading photographs across the mahogany desk. "Chinese triads are offering financial support for anyone who can eliminate Choi family leadership. Russians are providing weapons in exchange for territorial concessions. He's treating your wife's departure as evidence of weakness." "Let him think weakness," Jinho replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "Internal family matters don't affect business operations." But even as he spoke the words, Jinho knew they were lies. Kira's absence had created a hollow space in his chest that made concentration impossible, decision-making sluggish, and strategic thinking clouded by emotions he had spent years learning to compartmentalize. For 2 years, she had been his anchor to humanity, the reason he could justify every terrible choice by telling himself he was protecting something pure. Park Young-soo's expression suggested he understood exactly how devastating Kira's departure was to Jinho's psychological equilibrium. When a man builds his identity around protecting someone who no longer wants protection, the foundation of that identity begins to crumble in ways that affect everything from business judgment to operational security. Back in Chicago, Kira found herself unable to sleep despite exhaustion that felt bone-deep. Maya's apartment was too quiet after years of living in a penthouse where armed guards provided constant background presence. Every sound from the hallway made her jump. Every car backfiring outside made her duck. Every shadow at the window made her wonder if Jinho's enemies had followed her across continents and oceans. "She's afraid," Maya observed, finding Kira standing at the kitchen counter at 5 a.m., staring out the window like she expected sniper rifles trained on the building. "You're afraid that leaving him doesn't mean escaping his world. I spent 2 years living under protection I didn't understand I needed." Kira's voice carried exhaustion mixed with growing realization. Jinho wasn't paranoid about security. He was realistic about the number of people who would kill me to hurt him. Maya joined her at the window, studying the Chicago street that looked innocent in early morning light. "So what's the plan, Kira? You stay hidden forever, or you figure out how to build a life that doesn't require a crime boss's protection?" Before Kira could answer, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Beautiful wife. Wonderful sister. Interesting choice of hiding place. Your husband's enemies are more resourceful than you imagined. A friend." Kira's blood turned to ice as she realized that leaving Jinho hadn't freed her from his world. It had simply made her a target without protection. Maya read the message over her shoulder and immediately understood the implications. Organized crime syndicates didn't recognize neutral parties or innocent bystanders. "Call him," Maya said quietly. "Call Choi Jinho and tell him someone just threatened both our lives." "I can't," Kira whispered, though her hands were already shaking. "Calling him means admitting I need him. It means accepting that I can never be free of what he is. It means staying alive long enough to figure out whether freedom is worth dying for," Maya replied. "And it means protecting me from consequences of your marriage choices." The second message arrived 60 seconds later. "Building has excellent sight lines from multiple angles. Medical student sister would be unfortunate collateral damage. Clock is ticking." The attached photo showed Maya's apartment building taken from across the street. Professional surveillance that confirmed the threat was immediate and real. Kira dialed Jinho's number with fingers that felt like they belonged to someone else. He answered before the first ring finished, as if he had been holding the phone waiting for exactly this call. "Someone found me," she said without preamble. "Someone knows about Maya. They're watching us right now." The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds before Jinho's voice returned, transformed into something cold and lethal. "Give me the address. Don't leave the apartment. Don't go near windows. Don't trust anyone who isn't me." "Jinho, you left me, Kira, but you're still my wife." Jinho's words cut through her attempt at explanation like surgical steel. "Still my responsibility. Still under my protection whether you want it or not. And anyone who threatens what belongs to me learns very quickly why that was a mistake." The line went dead, leaving Kira to stare at her phone and realize that escaping Choi Jinho's world might have been impossible from the moment she said yes to his proposal. Maya was making coffee with shaking hands, trying to process how medical school and student loans had suddenly become secondary to survival against enemies she couldn't name or understand. Through the window, Chicago's morning traffic moved with innocent normalcy, people heading to jobs that didn't involve international crime syndicates or death threats delivered via text message. But for Kira Washington, the illusion of normal life was already crumbling under the weight of choices that had seemed so romantic 2 years ago and now felt like contracts signed in blood. Somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, Choi Jinho was mobilizing resources that would make Kim Jae-wook's tactical error the last mistake he ever made. The hunter had become the hunted, and Jinho intended to remind everyone why threatening his family was considered suicide in Seoul's criminal underworld. In Maya's apartment, two sisters waited for salvation that would come with a price neither of them was prepared to calculate, while enemies closed in on a hiding place that had never been as safe as innocence had made it seem. The attack came at 2:43 p.m. Chicago time, when Maya was supposed to be in anatomy class and Kira was supposed to be safe in a city 8,000 miles from Seoul's criminal underworld. Instead, both sisters found themselves pressed against Maya's bathroom floor, while five men with Eastern European accents systematically destroyed the apartment door with tools designed for exactly this purpose. Kira's phone had died 6 hours earlier, the battery drained by constant refreshing of news feeds, and Jinho's location tracker that showed him still somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. The silence felt ominous after a morning of increasingly urgent messages from unknown numbers, each one demonstrating more detailed knowledge of their location, their routines, and their vulnerability. Maya gripped a baseball bat with the determined incompetence of someone whose violence experience was limited to medical simulation dummies. At 26, she possessed intelligence that had earned full scholarships through undergraduate and medical programs. But intelligence meant nothing when faced with men whose occupation was systematic brutality. "They're not police," Kira whispered, recognizing the particular efficiency that marked professional criminals rather than law enforcement. These men moved with the casual confidence of people who had done this before, who understood that screaming neighbors and emergency services would arrive too late to matter. The front door splintered inward with a sound like breaking bones. Heavy footsteps moved through Maya's small apartment with predatory deliberation, checking corners and eliminating hiding places with military precision. Kira realized that leaving Jinho hadn't freed her from his world. It had simply made her an unprotected target for enemies who understood exactly how to hurt him most effectively. "Where is Korean boss wife?" A voice called in accented English. "We know you are here. We know medical sister is here. Make this simple for everyone." Through the bathroom's thin walls, Kira heard furniture being overturned, belongings being systematically destroyed, the sound of men who had been hired to send a message that extended far beyond simple kidnapping. This was psychological warfare designed to demonstrate that Jinho's protection meant nothing when his wife chose to reject it. Maya's breathing had become shallow and rapid, medical training warring with primal terror as she processed their situation. 5 armed men, 1 exit blocked, windows that opened onto a 3-story drop, and no realistic possibility of escape or successful resistance. Her baseball bat felt like a children's toy against automatic weapons and professional experience. The bathroom door exploded inward before either sister could react. Kira found herself staring into the face of a man whose scars suggested extensive experience with violence, whose eyes held the casual indifference of someone who viewed human suffering as routine job requirement. Behind him, for other men filled Maya's small apartment like wolves in a henhouse. "You are Choi Jinho wife," the scarred man said, though his tone suggested this was confirmation rather than question. "You will come with us now. Medical sister can watch or can die. Choice is yours." Kira stood slowly, her hands raised in surrender, calculating whether cooperation offered better survival odds than resistance. Maya remained crouched against the bathroom wall, still gripping the baseball bat, her medical training recognizing shock symptoms in her own body while being powerless to treat them. "What do you want?" Kira asked, though she already knew the answer. Jinho's enemies weren't interested in ransom or negotiation. They wanted to demonstrate that his protection was worthless, that loving him meant accepting consequences that extended to everyone she cared about. "We want Korean boss to understand cost of disrespecting Kim family operations." The scarred man's smile revealed teeth that had been broken and imperfectly repaired. "We want him to know that hiding wife in America means nothing when Kim Jae-wook has international resources." Before anyone could move, the apartment's remaining windows exploded inward simultaneously. Glass showered across hardwood floors as smoke canisters bounced off walls, filling the space with dense gray fog that burned eyes and throats. Through the chaos, Kira heard automatic weapons fire erupting from multiple directions, the distinctive sound of Jinho's security team eliminating threats with surgical precision. "Down," a familiar voice commanded in English, and Kira recognized Park Young-soo's authority cutting through the smoke and confusion. Jinho's most trusted lieutenant had arrived with enough firepower to level the entire building if necessary. The gunfight lasted 17 seconds and ended with 5 bodies scattered across Maya's apartment like broken furniture. Park Young-soo emerged from the smoke wearing tactical gear and the expression of someone who had just completed routine maintenance rather than international rescue operation. Behind him, 3 other Korean men moved through the apartment with professional efficiency, checking bodies and securing the scene. "Boss is 30 minutes out," Park Young-soo informed Kira, his English heavily accented but perfectly clear. "Private jet landed 20 minutes ago. He is very unhappy about security failure that required emergency intervention." Maya stared at the corpses littering her living room, her medical training automatically cataloging entry wounds and blood spatter patterns, while her mind struggled to process how studying for midterm examinations had evolved into international warfare. The baseball bat fell from her nerveless fingers as shock settled over her like a heavy blanket. "Is she okay?" Park Young-soo asked, gesturing toward Maya with professional concern rather than personal sympathy. "She's in shock," Kira replied, moving to check on her sister. "This isn't her world. She shouldn't have been dragged into this. Boss-wife choices have consequences for boss-wife family," Park Young-soo observed without judgment. Korean boss explained this when marriage began. American wife preferred not to listen. Before Kira could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside Maya's destroyed apartment. Choi Jinho filled the doorway like an avenging angel dressed in an Armani suit that somehow remained perfectly pressed despite international travel and coordinating military-grade rescue operations. His dark eyes swept the scene with clinical assessment before settling on Kira with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice carrying controlled fury that promised terrible retribution for anyone who had caused her fear. "I'm fine," Kira replied, though her voice shook with delayed reaction to how close death had come. "They wanted to use me against you. They were going to take me back to Seoul." Jinho stepped over Kim Jae-wook's operatives without looking down, moving toward Kira with predatory grace that reminded her why Seoul's criminal underworld treated his name like a prayer to dangerous gods. When he reached her, his hands framed her face with surprising gentleness, checking for injuries with the careful attention he usually reserved for examining weapons or counting money. "You left me," he said quietly. "You rejected my protection. But you are still my wife, and touching what belongs to me is an act of war that requires decisive response." Maya looked up from her position against the bathroom wall, finally processing that her apartment had become a crime scene, that her sister's marriage had brought international violence to Chicago, and that the man standing over dead bodies was the same one who had seemed so charming at Kira's wedding reception. "What happens now?" Maya asked, though part of her was afraid to hear the answer. "Now we go somewhere safe while I eliminate every person who thought threatening my family was acceptable business strategy," Jinho replied. "And your sister learns that leaving me doesn't mean escaping the consequences of loving me." Kira realized that Jinho's arrival hadn't rescued her from his world. It had dragged her back into it with the absolute clarity that departure was impossible. The men who had tried to kidnap her were dead, but Kim Jae-wook remained alive and motivated. Other enemies would see her attempted escape as evidence of weakness to exploit. And Jinho's protection, which she had tried to reject, had just proven itself the only thing standing between her and systematic torture designed to break his psychological equilibrium. Through Maya's destroyed windows, Chicago continued with innocent normalcy, people heading home from work and school without realizing that international crime syndicates had just conducted warfare 3 stories above the street. But for Kira Washington, the illusion that geography could provide safety had been shattered along with her sister's apartment door. When Jinho's security team escorted them toward the building's rear exit, Kira understood that she was walking back into the cage she had tried to escape, but with new appreciation for why the bars existed and what waited outside them for anyone foolish enough to believe that love and danger could be separated through distance and good intentions. Behind them, Park Young-soo was already coordinating cleanup services that would make Kim Jae-wook's assault team disappear as if they had never existed, leaving Maya's apartment ready for repair and her life ready for the kind of protection that came with accepting family connections to Seoul's most powerful crime boss. The war had begun, and Kira Washington was learning that neutrality had never been an option. The safe house existed in careful balance, two people orbiting each other like planets maintaining just enough distance to avoid collision. For 6 days, Kira Washington and Choi Jin-ho had established a routine built on polite boundaries and unspoken agreements. She took the master bedroom with its bulletproof windows and reinforced walls. He claimed the guest room down the hall, close enough to protect, but far enough to respect the space she had demanded. Each morning, Jin-ho briefed her over coffee about the threat status, keeping his promise of transparency with clinical precision. The Kim syndicate had lost 3 key lieutenants in the penthouse raid, but their leader Kim Jae-wook remained dangerously focused on retribution. Chinese triads were offering bounties for information about Choi family operations. Russian contacts had gone silent, suggesting either neutrality or preparation for opportunistic strikes. Kira listened to these updates with growing comprehension of the empire her husband controlled. She had lived within his world for 2 years while understanding almost nothing about its true scope. Now, seated across from Jin-ho at the Granite Breakfast Bar, she learned that Choi family operations stretched from Seoul shipping ports to Los Angeles drug distribution networks. Human trafficking routes through Southeast Asia generated 40% of their annual revenue. Protection rackets in Busan and Incheon provided steady income streams that funded legitimate business acquisitions. "How many people work for you?" she asked during Thursday morning's briefing, her coffee growing cold as the numbers accumulated. Directly, about 300. Jin-ho's response came without hesitation, as if discussing payroll for a conventional corporation. Indirectly, through partnerships and contracted services, closer to 2,000. And they all know what you do. What we do. They know I provide security services, manage import-export logistics, and facilitate business relationships between international partners. Jin-ho's dark eyes met hers across the table. Most prefer not to examine the details too closely. Willful ignorance is a survival skill in our world. Our world, Kira repeated, the words tasting foreign on her tongue. When did it become our world, Jin-ho? When exactly did I stop being Kira Washington from Chicago and become an accessory to organized crime? The moment you said yes when I asked you to marry me. His honesty was brutal in its simplicity. The moment you accepted a 3-carat diamond purchased with money that came from suffering. The moment you moved into a penthouse bought with blood. Kira set down her coffee cup with deliberate care, her hands steadier than her heartbeat. So I've been complicit for 2 years without even knowing it. Every designer dress, every charity gala, every romantic dinner was funded by human misery. Jin-ho was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with the intensity that had first attracted and now unnerved her. "You want the truth about who I am," he said finally. "About how a man becomes the kind of monster you married." She nodded, though part of her wanted to run back to the comfortable ignorance that had sustained their marriage through 24 months of beautiful lies. "I was 12 when my father died." Jin-ho's voice carried the careful control he used when emotions threatened to crack his professional facade. Lee Dong-min owned half of Busan's fishing industry, controlled dock worker unions, and provided security for businesses that couldn't rely on police protection. When he was murdered by rival families trying to consolidate territory, my mother and sister faced a choice. Accept charity from the same men who killed him, or watch me take over operations that were barely legal but absolutely necessary for survival. Kira found herself leaning forward despite her resolve to maintain distance. How does a 12-year-old boy take over criminal operations? Very carefully, with help from men who saw opportunity in tragedy. Jin-ho's smile held no warmth. Park Young-soo became my mentor. Taught me that violence is just another business tool, that mercy is luxury poor families cannot afford. By 15, I was collecting debts. By 18, I was eliminating problems that negotiations couldn't solve. By 25, I controlled everything my father built and had expanded into markets he never imagined. And now, Kira asked quietly, "What kind of man do you want to be now?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was certain they should cross. Jin-ho reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers before she could pull away. The touch sent electricity through her despite everything, despite the horror of learning what their marriage had really cost. I want to be the man who deserves you, he said. I want to wake up knowing that my power protects instead of destroys. But I don't know how to build something clean when everything I touch turns bloody. Maybe we figure it out together, Kira heard herself saying. Maybe there's a way to use what you've built for something better than fear. They sat in silence, hands almost touching across marble that reflected their faces like a mirror, showing two people discovering each other for the first time. The careful distance that had defined their safe house routine began to collapse under the weight of honesty. Jinho's thumb traced across her knuckles, and Kira didn't pull away. The moment shattered when Jinho's encrypted phone buzzed against the granite surface. He answered in rapid Korean, his expression shifting from vulnerable to dangerous in seconds. When the conversation ended, he looked at her with the controlled panic of a man realizing his best-laid plans were crumbling. We need to move tonight, he said. They found the safe house location. Kim Jae-wook is mobilizing everything he has. Kira's blood turned cold. How long do we have? 3 hours, maybe 4. Jinho was already standing, his transformation back into crime boss mode complete. Pack only essentials. We leave in 20 minutes. Through the bulletproof windows, Seoul's afternoon light seemed suddenly ominous, shadows that might hide enemies, innocent pedestrians who could be surveillance. Kira realized that transparency and trust were luxuries they had just run out of time to fully explore. The careful balance of their safe house routine was about to explode into chaos, and this time, there might not be another sanctuary waiting for them. Jinho disappeared into his room to gather weapons and emergency funds, leaving Kira alone with the terrible knowledge that loving a monster meant accepting that safety was always temporary, and that the price of his protection might be higher than either of them understood. The first gunshot shattered the reinforced windows at exactly 2:47 a.m., glass exploding inward like deadly snow. Kira jolted awake in the master bedroom, her heart hammering against her ribs as automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple directions. Through the chaos, she heard Jinho's voice cutting through the violence with deadly calm, Korean commands mixing with English as he coordinated defensive positions. She pressed herself against the floor, crawling toward the reinforced bathroom as bullets chewed through expensive furniture and artwork. The safe house that had felt like a temporary sanctuary revealed itself as exactly what Jinho had always known it to be, a fortress under siege. Smoke grenades detonated in the hallway, filling the air with acrid gray fog that burned her eyes and throat. Jinho appeared in the bedroom doorway like a shadow made flesh, no longer the vulnerable man who had shared coffee and confessions 12 hours earlier. His expensive shirt was torn, blood spattering his collar from a grazing wound across his left shoulder. In his hands, he carried 2 Glock pistols with the casual familiarity of a surgeon holding scalpels. His dark eyes held the cold calculation that had built an empire on fear and precisely applied violence. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. Kim Jae-wook brought everyone he could buy or threaten. "They want to finish this tonight." "How many?" Kira managed to ask, though her throat felt lined with sand and terror. "Too many for a defensive strategy." Jinho checked his weapons with mechanical precision, each movement economical and deadly. "I'm ending this permanently." "What does that mean?" she whispered, though part of her already understood. The man she had married, the one who brought her flowers and whispered poetry in Korean, was disappearing into the killer who had built his reputation on eliminating problems that negotiations couldn't solve. It means Kim Jae-wook dies tonight, along with anyone stupid enough to stand with him. Jinho's transformation was complete, his features sharpening into something predatory and merciless. "It means you stay here and let me do what I should have done months ago, instead of trying to manage this situation diplomatically." He kissed her forehead with surprising gentleness, a stark contrast to the violence radiating from every line of his body. Then he vanished into the smoke-filled hallway, leaving Kira alone with the sound of systematic execution beginning in the rooms below. For 47 minutes, Kira listened to Choi Jinho dismantle Kim Jae-wook's assault force with terrifying efficiency. Individual gunshots replaced the chaos of automatic fire. Each crack of his weapon marking another life ended with surgical precision. She heard him moving through the safe house like death itself, clearing rooms and eliminating threats with the cold professionalism that that had made his reputation legendary in Seoul's underworld. When the shooting stopped, the silence felt more ominous than the violence. Kira crept from the bathroom to find Jinho standing in the living room, surrounded by bodies arranged with almost artistic care. Kim Jae-wook knelt in the center, hands zip-tied behind his back, blood streaming from his nose and mouth. His expensive suit was torn, his face swollen from methodical beating. Jinho held a chrome-plated pistol against Kim Jae-wook's temple, his finger steady on the trigger. "This is what happens when you threaten what belongs to me," he said in English, ensuring Kira could understand every word. "This is what happens when you mistake patience for weakness." "Please," Kim Jae-wook whispered, his voice broken and desperate. "I have children. I have a wife who knows nothing about this business. So did the women you sold to traffickers in Bangkok." Jinho's response came without emotion, as if discussing weather patterns. "So did the families you destroyed building your territory in Gangnam. Your children will be better off without a father who teaches them that power comes from causing suffering." The gunshot reverberated through Kira's chest like a physical blow. Kim Jae-wook's body crumpled forward, blood pooling across marble floors that had cost more than most people's homes. Jinho stood over the corpse with casual indifference, already moving to search through his dead enemy's pockets for intelligence about remaining threats. Kira pressed her hand against her mouth, while rising in her throat. She had known intellectually that Jinho killed people. She had suspected and ignored and rationalized and pretended. But watching him execute a pleading man with the emotional detachment of stepping on an insect shattered every comfortable lie she had told herself about who she had married. "I can't do this anymore," she said, backing toward the shattered windows. "I can't pretend this is normal. I can't pretend that loving you doesn't make me complicit in murder." Jinho looked up from Kim Jae-wook's body, his expression shifting from cold satisfaction to something approaching panic as he registered the horror in her face. "Kira, you need to understand." "I understand perfectly," she interrupted, her voice rising toward hysteria. "I understand that I've been living with a monster who kills people like it's a business meeting. I understand that every kiss, every promise, every moment of tenderness has been contaminated by blood." She turned toward the door, desperate to escape the carnage, to breathe air that didn't smell like death and cordite. Jinho moved faster than seemed possible, crossing the room in 3 strides to block her path. For the first time since their wedding day, his legendary control cracked completely. "You're not leaving me," he said, the words exploding from him with desperate intensity. His hands gripped her shoulders, not gently, not with the careful consideration he usually showed her. "You don't get to walk away from this. You don't get to pretend you're innocent when you've been living off blood money for 2 years. Kira tried to push past him, but Jinho's grip tightened. His dark eyes held something she had never seen before, genuine fear. Not fear of death or defeat or business failure, but terror at the prospect of losing the one thing that kept him tethered to humanity. "Let me go," she demanded, though her voice lacked conviction. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. This is why I tried to leave before. You can't separate the man from the monster because they're the same person. Without you, I'm just a monster," Jinho admitted, his voice breaking on the words. "Every terrible thing I do, every life I take, every choice that damns my soul a little more, I justify it by telling myself I'm protecting you. You're the reason I have left to be human." His confession hit her like a physical blow. The vulnerability in his voice, the raw need that he had never allowed himself to show, cracked something fundamental in her chest. This wasn't manipulation or calculation. This was Choi Jinho, Seoul's most feared crime boss, admitting that love had become his last connection to the man he used to be. "You can't put that responsibility on me," Kira whispered, though her struggle against his grip had stopped. "You can't make me the reason you choose violence, and then blame me when I can't watch anymore." "Then help me find another way," Jinho said, pulling her closer until she could feel his heartbeat against her chest. "Help me build something that doesn't require blood to maintain. But don't leave me to become the monster that everyone expects me to be." The safe house fell silent around them, death and destruction providing the backdrop for the most honest conversation of their marriage. Kira looked into Jinho's eyes and saw something she had never recognized before, a man drowning in the darkness he had created, desperate for someone to throw him a lifeline back to the light. When she kissed him, It wasn't forgiveness or absolution. It was recognition that they were both trapped in the same beautiful, terrible cage, and that breaking free would require more courage than either of them possessed alone. His response was desperate, possessive, claiming her mouth like a man grasping salvation. "This doesn't mean I forgive you for the killing," she said against his lips. "This doesn't mean I accept what you've done. It means you're not giving up on what we could become," Jinho replied, his hands framing her face with reverent desperation. "It means we figure out how to build something clean from what we have, no matter how blood-soaked the foundation." Around them, the bodies of Kim Jae-wook's assault team provided grim reminder of the price their love had cost. But for the first time since their explosive fight began, Kira Washington and Choi Jinho stood together in truth rather than beautiful lies, ready to discover whether love could truly transform a monster or if she was simply choosing to become one herself. 3 weeks after the Safe House massacre, Kira Washington stood in the penthouse living room where their marriage had nearly ended, watching Jinho methodically burn files that represented 40% of Choi family criminal operations. The imported marble floors had been professionally cleaned, removing every trace of Kim Jae-wook's blood, but the memory of that night hung between them like expensive perfume that had turned toxic. The man feeding documents into the fireplace bore little resemblance to the cold executioner who had eliminated an entire assault team with surgical precision. Choi Jinho moved with careful deliberation, reading each file before consigning it to flames, his dark eyes reflecting something that looked dangerously close to hope. He had traded his usual pristine suits for casual clothes, dark jeans, and a white button-down that made him appear younger, more human, less like Seoul's most feared crime boss. "Tell me again what this accomplishes," Kira said, settling into the leather chair that faced both the fireplace and the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Because burning evidence doesn't change the fact that people are still dead, money is still dirty, and your reputation is still built on fear. It accomplishes the beginning of change," Jinho replied, adding another trafficking route manifest to the fire. Human trafficking operations in Bangkok permanently shut down. Drug distribution networks in Los Angeles transferred to legitimate pharmaceutical partnerships. Protection rackets in Busan converted to actual security services with real contracts and legal frameworks. Kira studied his profile, searching for signs of manipulation or calculated performance. After 2 years of marriage and countless lies, she had learned to recognize when Jinho was managing her emotions versus revealing authentic intention. This felt different. The careful control that usually armored his expressions had been replaced by something rawer, more uncertain. "What's the timeline?" she asked. "How long before Choi family operations look like an actual legitimate business instead of organized crime with better accounting?" 5 years for complete transition. 2 years to eliminate everything that involves human suffering. 6 months to establish the charitable foundation that will serve as cover and genuine purpose for redirecting resources. Jinho met her eyes across the fireplace. "But it starts today, with your conditions being met without negotiation or compromise." "My conditions," Kira repeated, though she knew exactly what he meant. The list she had presented 3 days ago when they returned to the penthouse felt like demands from a different lifetime. "No more murders unless someone directly threatens our family. No more human trafficking under any circumstances. No more businesses that profit from addiction or desperation. Complete transparency about operations and transition progress. Active participation in building something worth defending instead of just maintaining through violence. Your conditions become our foundation," Jinho said, burning the last file and turning to face her completely. "But I have conditions too, Kira. You don't get to pretend that transformation excuses the past. You don't get to act like you're saving me from myself when you're choosing to build a future with blood money. And you don't get to leave again when the process becomes difficult or morally complicated." The honesty in his voice stripped away any pretense that this would be simple redemption story. Kira realized that Jinho was offering her partnership in rebuilding his empire rather than absolution from its history. She would be complicit in legitimizing power that had been earned through suffering, profiting from investments that had been funded by death, building charity with money that had been stolen from families who would never see justice. "I accept your conditions," she said quietly. "But I have one more demand." Jinho raised an eyebrow, his expression shifting into the careful neutrality he used during business negotiations. "We remarry," Kira continued. "Not renewing vows. Not recommitting to promises we made when we didn't understand their cost. We create new promises that acknowledge who we really are and what we're really choosing." The suggestion hung between them like a bridge that would either connect their past to a different future or collapse under the weight of everything they had learned about each other. Jinho was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with the intensity that had first attracted her and now served as foundation for something more complex than attraction. When he asked simply, "Tonight, private ceremony, just us and promises that matter. No guests who need to be impressed. No pretense about white dresses and innocence. No celebration of something pure when we're both choosing to build beauty from ugliness." Jinho crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, his hands covering hers with reverent care. "What kind of promises?" he asked, his voice carrying vulnerability that would have been impossible 3 weeks ago. "Promise me that your power will protect more than it destroys. Promise me that you'll remember the cost of every choice we make together. Promise me that if I become too comfortable with compromise, you'll remind me what we're supposed to be building toward." His response was a kiss that tasted like smoke and possibility, possession tempered by respect, desire balanced with recognition of what love could cost them both. When they separated, Jinho's eyes held the determination of a man who had found something worth transforming himself to deserve. "Promise me that you'll stop me if I become the monster again," he said against her forehead. "Promise me that you'll build this foundation with me instead of just supervising my redemption from a safe distance. Promise me that when our children ask about their father's past, you'll help me find words that honor truth without destroying hope." The mention of children sent electricity through Kira's chest, a future possibility that had seemed impossible when she was packing suitcases and planning escape routes. She realized that Jinho was offering her not just partnership in business transformation, but genuine partnership in creating something that had never existed, a crime empire that evolved into legitimate power, blood money that funded actual charity, fear-based respect that gradually became trust-based leadership. 6 months later, Kira Washington Choi stood in the conference room of the newly established Choi Foundation, reviewing proposals for women's shelters in Southeast Asia that would be funded by profits from security consulting and legitimate import-export operations. The Foundation's mission statement, framed on the wall behind her desk, read like confession and commitment, transforming power into protection, resources into rescue, influence into hope. Jinho entered the conference room carrying coffee and quarterly reports, his presence still commanding but gentle by purpose that extended beyond territorial dominance. The Choi family operations now employed former trafficking victims as translators and advocates, funded escape networks for women trapped in situations Kira had learned to recognize, and provided legitimate work for men who had once survived through violence. The transformation wasn't complete, might never be complete. Jinho still carried weapons, still commanded respect through reputation rather than pure charisma, still made decisions that cost lives when threats emerged against their family or foundation work. But the killings were rare now, defensive rather than offensive, and Kira had learned to distinguish between violence that served their mission and violence that served only ego or expedience. Through the conference room windows, Seoul sprawled like a circuit board of light and shadow, a city where the Choi name now funded hospitals instead of brothels, where protection money had become actual protection services, where fear was gradually being replaced by something approaching respect. That evening, in the penthouse that had once felt like a beautiful prison, Kira discovered she was pregnant. The revelation came through a simple test, 2 pink lines that transformed blood money into inheritance, criminal empire into family legacy, uncertain future into absolute necessity for continued transformation. When she told Jinho, his response was silence followed by tears he hadn't cried since his sister's funeral 15 years earlier. He placed his hand on her still flat stomach with the reverence of a man touching salvation itself, and made promises to their unborn child about becoming worthy of the love that had already changed him in ways he was still discovering. The wedding photo that had once dominated their bedroom dresser had been replaced by a picture from the Foundation's first anniversary gala. Kira and Jinho standing with women they had helped escape trafficking, children who were attending school on foundation scholarships, former gang members who now worked legitimate security jobs. The image captured them not as they had been, young and naive about the cost of the choices they were making, but as they had become, partners in building something complex and imperfect, but genuinely worth defending. Later, as souls settled into midnight quiet and they prepared for sleep in the bed where their marriage had nearly ended, Kira realized that loving Choi Jin-ho had never been about changing him from monster into saint. It had been about discovering whether two people could choose to transform together, whether power earned through darkness could be redirected toward light, whether love could survive the complete honesty that most relationships could never withstand. In the morning, they would return to the difficult work of building an empire worthy of their child's inheritance, balancing justice with pragmatism, transformation with acceptance of past choices that could never be undone. But tonight, Kira Washington Choi fell asleep in the arms of a man who had kept every promise that mattered, whose transformation from monster into protector continued with each choice to use power for healing rather than harm. Outside their windows, Seoul dreamed under stars that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the corruption and redemption of power, the endless human struggle to build something beautiful from whatever materials were available. Inside the penthouse, two people who had nearly destroyed each other with love were learning that the strongest foundations were built not on perfection, but on the courage to keep choosing each other despite knowing exactly what that choice would cost.